Hi, I'm David Taylor, and I'm here to talk about Guanaroca, a play performed by a Cuban theater group, Teatro de los Elementos, and its use of this creation myth to raise awareness of climate change. Real quickly, as a sort of overview of my talk today, I'm going to talk a little bit about Cuba and climate change, particularly the lagoon, Guanaroca, and the impacts of climate change, something about the myth of Guanaroca, and then also a little bit more about Teatro de los Elementos, the theater group, and then some conclusions to think about this. And I'll show a short clip of the performance. Real quickly, I started my work in Cuba 4 to 5 years ago because of the question of Cuba's place in sustainability and climate change. During the 90s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Cuba became a really unique place to study sustainability because of the sort of innovative ways it dealt with the special period and the collapse of the Soviet Union. They returned to local organic farming. They began to look at other kinds of transportation. And they're still looking at this in a way that is doing some very innovative things. In 2006, the World Wildlife Fund considered Cuba the most sustainable nation in the Western Hemisphere. However, climate change is going to affect the Caribbean nations much more immediately than other nations. Part of this is because of the problems of infrastructure and the ability to create resilient zones. Also, then with Cuba now, because of Obama's changing of travel restrictions, it's actually now preparing for a lot of influx of tourists. And so they're dealing with what to do with resort areas, and particularly beach areas, which are vulnerable to climate change the most. Also, and this has been part of my interest, is looking at how Cubans communicate environmental issues and concerns. Up until really the last 6 months, Wi-Fi and computers were very rare. And so their forms of communication and outreach are very different than the ways that we think of this in the United States. I want to make very clear where the Guanaroca Lagoon is. It's sort of in the south side of the island, in the central part. It's near a relatively large city, Cienfuegos, but it's a relatively remote area. A close-up here shows the lagoon that's down at the bottom of the bahia, or the bay of Cienfuegos. And you see it sort of reaches out into this. It's fed by 2 small rivers, the Rio Arimao and the Rio Guanaroca. It is a really fascinating place because it's about 3,000 hectares, but it's a sort of minor tourist destination because of the flamingo population that's there. Groups of 12 to 14 tourists will come at a time, and one of the Cubans will paddle the boat out to the middle of the lagoon in order to watch the flamingos. They're made, of course, all the more pink because of the shrimp farming that's done in the lagoon right now. However, climate change is going to affect the lagoon dramatically. If you see here that air temperatures will rise between 1 and 5 degrees Celsius before 2080. Sea levels will rise between 0.5 to 1.4 meters by 2100, and then of course seawater temperatures will also rise. What this really means is that the lagoon is going to dramatically change by saltwater intrusion, seawater warming, which is going to affect the mangrove forest that surrounds the lagoon, and it's going to dramatically affect the ecology, which of course is also going to demand that the flamingo population and the herons, which are the tourist reasons to be there, are also probably going to have to find a new environment. So let me go back a little bit from now and tell you a little bit about the story and the myth of the creation of Guanaroca Lagoon. This myth is syncretic, meaning that it borrows from both Taino and indigenous knowledge, but uses the names from Yoruba, meaning that we know the story predates Spanish colonization. But what happens is, with the Taino being exterminated, that what happened is that the story was continually told. African slaves brought with them, though, names for the gods. And so what happens in the oral tradition of the story now is you see that Yoruba names for the gods are also mixed in with Taino names, such as Guanaroca, Amau, and Imau. And so what happens is you see this sort of mix of the kind of previous group, the enslaved group, and then of course the Spanish sort of continuing on this story. The plot is pretty consistent, the way it's told in different places and different people. There is basically Hamao, who's the first man. He is made by the gods. He sees the beauty of nature. He is lonely because he sees its beauty. The gods then create Guanaroca, the first woman. They fall in love. They're together. They bear a child, Imao. Guanaroca, though, gives her whole energy and time and love to the child. And of course, then Hamao feels jealous. One morning, he wakes up early, takes the child with him to the mountains, to the Escambray Mountains, just to the east of Guanaroca Lagoon. There, the child dies from exposure. The father feels so guilty, he decides to hide the body in a huira, which is basically a gourd-like fruit from a tree in the area. And from this, he puts the huira back in the tree. Guanaroca wakes up and wonders where her child and her husband are. And she begins to worry. And she walks all the way to the mountains. And there, a blackbird guides her eyesight up to the tree, to the huira that holds her child's body. And she sees it and takes it down. And from this, she sees the body of her child. And she drops it. And from the broken huira, out fly fish and turtles and flowing water. And from there, her tears begin the river that then feeds the lagoon. And so the lagoon is supposed to have been created by her salty tears. Now, I'm going to bring this back again, but I want to switch to the theater group that put together a performance of the myth. Teatro de los Elementos owns a portion of land in the Escambray Mountains. They were founded in 1991, but like much of Cuban theater, they're not focused just on doing performances. They're also very involved in their community. And particularly, Teatro de los Elementos is involved in working with people teaching traditional farming techniques, to go back and actually reforest some of the area. They collaborate with scientific groups as well as cultural groups across the nation in order to think of their work not just as theater, but also as theater in the service of community and of nature. As Jose Oriol says in an interview I did with him, is that this is something that we worked on, to have a community that defends nature, that loves it, and that lives within it, and that they're connected, and that this was always part of the mission of the theater group. So real quickly, I want to talk about then they're taking the myth and creating a performance. As you'll see here in a second, they decided to stage the myth as two speakers. One woman dressed in blue with face paint as blue holding a shell, much as as the figure or the goddess of water, which in Yoruba tradition is Yemaya. The other woman is in red and in clay, and she is holding the sort of swaddled child in her hands. The play then really is always performed over a body of water as a way to honor the sort of history of ocean, rivers, and lagoons in the story. So real quickly, let me show you a clip of the performance. It begins with their speaking in Lukumi.
Todo era fuego y rocas ardientes.
So one of the things that you see here is that you see that it's performed over this bridge. This is a tributary that actually flows into the Rio Aramao. But what they're doing is, you see on one side the woman as ocean or water, and you see the other on this side. They begin in an invocation. Then the woman as water speaks, telling the history of the creation of Hamao, the first man, and also the creation of Guanaroca, the first woman. From this, you see the second speaker, the one dressed in red as earth, tells the entire rest of the story. So let me go on from here, and if you have a chance, please go look this up on Vimeo. I'll make that available so that everyone can find it. It's a 9-minute performance. But what I want to talk about now is how and why, what's the significance of performing this myth? Keep in mind, this is a myth that everyone in the area, and quite frankly, everyone throughout Cuba knows this myth. It is a story that's told about the creation of this lagoon. It's a story that borrows from the Yoruba gods that are traditionally told and sort of like our, Bunyan tales. And these are things where these are familiar names. But to put it to a theatrical performance is in some ways an important thing to do at this time. They're acknowledging what was a pre-colonial myth, overlaid with African gods, now told in the context in which it's spoken in Spanish. And so when you see this, they're very careful the way that they put the myth together. They're trying to honor the gods. They're trying to honor the history and its syncretic history while performing it over water. It's a very brief, minimal storyline. It's also then trying to show then the beauty of this lagoon as we know from this story. But Teatro de los Elementos also has a particular reason to do this play now. Creating the performance now indirectly reminds us of what is being altered due to climate change. And Teatro de los Elementos knows that this was part of the reason to perform the myth, to show this myth now to those as they're beginning to see the lagoon dramatically changed. So notice what it does. It's not just that they're trying to remind them of some sort of aesthetic beauty of what the lagoon is, because they realize to put this myth to performance now is also to acknowledge it's being altered, and that as climate change continues, it will continue to be altered. And what does that then do to the myth that's been told for centuries in one way, when we now have a lagoon that can no longer reflect what the myth is trying to show? So as I try to point out in looking at this, in conclusion, you see that Teatro de los Elementos' performance of Guanaroca reminds viewers of the connected origin and fecundity, while also though showing an awareness of climate change and the effect of rising sea levels on the lagoon. The sheer act of putting this myth into performance as both looking backward and acknowledging the future of climate change, there is a very self-aware purpose of showing this myth. It's not merely romantic looking backward. It's partly looking forward with a sense of the sadness and loss and change that they're faced with. And as Jose Oriol has said to me at one point, I wonder what the next myth will be. I wonder what it will need to be performed over, and I wonder how we will be able to tell it. So real quickly, as I wrap this up, I just want to thank the organizations in Cuba that have supported my work and scholarship, the University of Havana, the Foundation for Sustainability, and the UNIAC, the writers organization, as well as Artes Escénicas, which is the National Performing Arts group. And then very briefly, as you want, there's a lot of things that I consulted that you don't really need to look over too much, but if you would like to see this in more detail, please email me and I'll be happy to send you these details. Thank you very much for your time.